The MTD CNC podcast, sponsored by Langley Alloys, unique metals for demanding applications, providing first-class performance and an international service.
Hello and welcome to another MTD CNC podcast being filmed here at our headquarters on Barnfield Farm in Burton Latimer. I'm with Lee Scott and what we're actually going to do today is follow up on a podcast that we did. It must have been 2-3 months ago, I guess you were here. Might have even been long,
6 months ago.
6 months ago, yeah. And we discussed manufacturing and a subject that's close to both of our hearts and that I'm sure many of you listening or watching today. And we're going to talk about where we are in the world ranking, and we're going to talk about some of the things that are happening within manufacturing and some of the statistics. You're well armed today, Lee, with some documentation, which we'll talk about where that's come from as well. But it's going to be really interesting and fascinating, as it is always talking to you, Lee. Welcome to the podcast. There's a bit of a long-winded introduction there, but needed to get it out.
There's a lot of stuff to talk about.
There is. So if we start with, firstly, I'd like to say if you're watching this and you do want to contribute, because we don't know the answers to a lot of this stuff as we'll go through here, and what we're doing is we're looking at some of the facts that have been published, because what we want is a stronger manufacturing sector, as I'm sure you do, and we want government to listen.
We do.
And we'll touch on that as we go through. So Lee, the big point really to start with is when we last spoke on our podcast, which, like you say, was probably 6 months ago now, we were the 8th largest manufacturer in the world. We've now dropped down the table to number 12, which is, it's a bad thing. It is a bad thing. It's there's going to be lots of positives that come out of our conversation today, but we can't dress this up in any way. We've dropped down the rankings. Why is that?
Well, yeah, we were giving each other high fives 6 months ago, and how do we get to 6th and 5th place was the discussion. But we've now dropped out of the top 10 rankings for the third time. We're 12th. We have fallen behind Mexico, Russia, Italy, France, and Taiwan since we last spoke. So the data that we've got here, which is from an article in the Engineer, but this information is widely available, shows that in 2022 manufacturing output in the UK was 259 billion. So we still have a very good, strong industry, but we're losing away globally.
I mean, is that because these other nations that you mention are strengthening their output, or is it down to the fact that we're just, I guess they must be?
Yeah, the work is there globally. Their manufacturing base is getting stronger. We're not keeping up the pace.
Let's then talk about, there is lots of success stories, and we publish them on MTD CNC's social media pages, so there's lots of good news that happens within manufacturing. Things like reshoring we spoke about last time. These are really important factors within growing manufacturing, aren't they?
They are. We touched on offset, we touched on reshoring. We didn't talk about the politics, and we didn't talk about the numbers last time. One thing that's been discussed in the industry for a long time is the lack of a long-term industrial strategy, and 8 in 10 manufacturers in the UK feel that they're at a competitive disadvantage compared to other nations that have industrial strategies. We need to address why.
I mean, an industrial strategy, what would that kind of look like then? I mean, it sounds sensible. I suppose within any business you'd want a plan, you'd want ways of making it more competitive and all the rest of it. I guess that's what an industrial strategy is it?
Well, it is. It's a plan with targets, isn't it? Plan the work the plan. We all work the same way. So without a plan, we don't have goals and objectives and targets, and that's really what the long-term industrial strategy needs to bring. If you look at technology, people use robots as a gauge for how advanced we are in terms of technology. We've dropped from 8th to 12th in terms of our manufacturing ranking. We're actually down at 24th in terms of robot usage in the UK. So there's a lot of things we need to do to enhance our capabilities and technology in the UK, and then become a great manufacturing nation back in the top 10 again.
Now, there's a report that we're going to discuss in detail, which we're going to undress it and look at some of the key numbers surrounding our sector and what that means to our economy and how important it is. Before we do that, Lee, part of industrial strategies as well includes things like upskilling, reskilling people. I guess if you do the right things in these areas and you invest maybe in automation to have more robots and go up that ranking too, things like that put together, form an industrial strategy, don't they? They kind of form this way forward.
The previous government spoke about it. We don't know what the new government will do, but there was talk about a new industrial strategy and key investments from the National Wealth Fund. Now these things need to carry on and improve with the new government that's in place. But as part of that, there's a major upskilling and reskilling programme required. Without the right people with the right skills, we won't be able to hit the productivity targets that we need to get back into this higher ranking. And even with the latest ideas, we need the right technology and funding to be in place.
Yeah, I mean, as well as where we buy parts from, who makes them, and all the rest of it. This is what we'll touch on and go through here. But I mean, all of these factors put together, it sounds like running a business in a sense, isn't it? Which I guess in a lot of ways it is. It's trying to get the best from what you've got, and you have to identify the areas where you're most profitable and you're most productive, and kind of exploit them, and I guess manufacturing, what we're going to talk about, is one of those, really, isn't it? Which is undervalued in a sense, and
it is, and I think what we'll touch on is not just the manufacturing sector, but the subsector of engineering within that manufacturing sector, and I think it's important that we emphasise today how important that is.
Yeah. What do you got here?
What this is a report that was put out by the MTA, pulled together by Oxford Economics. So there's a lot of facts and figures in here. Now, I was searching on the internet for all sorts of stuff, and I came across this report, and it answers a lot of the questions I'd got. So I'm going to refer to this a lot as we speak. But it's supported by Catapult, who we both know well, Make UK, Siemens, and Lloyds Bank. So a lot of credible information in this.
Yeah.
In this
okay.
document.
Well, and I'm sure you're going to be using this as a guide, and this is available to download, isn't it? We got this from the MTA, so it's a real worthwhile download to be able to, if you're interested in the types of topics that we're talking about here. We recently published a figure on our social media post about this 518 billion, which is the value of manufacturing, or what manufacturing contributed to the UK economy. That number, what does that comprise of, and how does that number work?
It's a good question, because it's a big number and it can be misleading. So there's three elements I'm about to talk about. There's the direct impact of manufacturing. There's the indirect impact of manufacturing, which is the supply chain. And then there's the induced impact, which is the wider economical benefits from the money made in manufacturing, so where we spend the money and how much money is spent in the economy, as well as the manufacturing output. So the 518 billion is the total, if you like. But if we take manufacturing to start with, manufacturing employs 2.6 million workers who generate an estimated 184 billion in GDP, which is about 8% of GDP. Now, if you add the supply chain to that, then that figure goes up to 348 billion, with about 5 million jobs. If you then build in the indirect and induced impacts of manufacturing, so as I say, that's all the money we spend generated from manufacturing in the economy, it's 518 billion. So it's a massive number.
It's over 20% of our GDP.
I think it's 23% from 2022.
Yeah. And the area that we're involved in, and probably the majority of our audience watching this, where is that represented in that 518?
We're a subsector of that. So in total, the engineering subsector contributed 193 billion, but of that includes 66 billion that engineering firms contributed directly, plus 128 billion from indirect and induced multipliers which is the subcontractors and all the money we spend. So in total, it's 193 billion of the 518 billion.
So it's a reasonable percentage, 40%.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
doing the math.
Just from engineering.
Okay. Exporting is something that I wanted to touch on as well, because, you know, as a manufacturing nation, exports are obviously key to our GDP and the numbers that we talk about. How good are we at it, and is that area growing?
Well, we're good at it because we still export about 34% of what we manufacture. However, if you go back to 2000, we manufactured and exported 56%. So exporting, whilst it's still a good value, has actually declined in the last 20 odd years.
So that's a percentage, but when I guess in terms of a quantity of product, that would depend on whether our exports have generally grown as a nation, wouldn't it? I suppose we're talking about a percentage here.
Yeah, but it's all relative, isn't it? If we've dropped 20%, if we've dropped 34, almost 20%.
Yeah.
Then whatever the value is, that value has proportionally dropped 20%.
Yeah. And I mean, in employment as well. This is a big part of our, what we talk about is youth coming through, education. Are the employment numbers within manufacturing changing? Are they staying the same? Where are we with that?
Well, again, you would expect over years the employment level to have increased, but it's actually stayed stable. Since 2010, the direct employment in manufacturing has been stable at around 2.6 million. So there's been no change at all.
And when we look at that, would we expect more employees within our sector? Or would we think, okay, well, we have automation now, we have, we talk about robots, okay, we're 24th position, but if people are investing in those, is there an argument to suggest that 2.6 million should probably stay the same even if the sector grows? Just with more skilled workers?
There is an argument that technology kills jobs, and the higher technology and the more robots and all those sort of things require less overall jobs. I don't buy that. I think technology creates different jobs, but even if technology meant less jobs, proportionally you'd still expect as manufacturing grew, employment would also grow. So it's showing that manufacturing isn't growing enough to me.
Well, that's my next question, Sen. Is the manufacturing sector growing in terms of its GDP?
No, it's not. In terms of the last 2 decades, there's also a drop. In 2022, the manufacturing sector directly contributed 184 billion in gross value added to the UK economy. Still a great number, still a big number, and still something we should be proud of, but we need to grow. But that equates to just over 8%, whereas back in 2000 we were up at over 12%. So again, there's a drop.
Yeah. Brexit has happened in this period. This was a time that we needed to and should be trying to capitalise on the fact that we are now not part of the EU. Have you? I guess these figures tell a story in that.
Well, looking at these figures, there's no change since Brexit. So the decline is straight line from 2000 to 2010 in terms of decline, and then a horizontal from 2010 to now, almost horizontal. So the drop was 2000 to 10, and then we've been stable since. So Brexit hasn't been a significant factor in that.
It hasn't been an impact, but either way, it's not been a positive or a negative, I guess we're saying here. So
sure.
Yeah,
sure.
What about then in terms of what the things we should be doing, investments and where we put capital in order to improve things like productivity, which then might have a knock-on effect?
Sure. I'm going to quote this. Productivity is important because productivity growth in an economy is necessary for improving living standards. So the more productive we are, the higher living standards, the more wealth we create within the economy, and the more we spend within the economy. So productivity is key, and higher productivity comes directly through innovation and the use of technology and Industry 4 type type benefits. What concerns me, and again it's in this report here, is that the UK has experienced slow productivity growth since the global crisis, and we lag behind our peers in the G7. This shouldn't be happening. So given that manufacturing has above average productivity levels and has experienced above average productivity growth in recent years, the expansion of manufacturing has the potential to raise productivity levels in the UK and increase the amount of money that we re-spend in the UK, which is why the manufacturing industry is so important.
The next point I wanted to pick out, Lee, is we've mentioned about exports already, but how important, I mean, we previously discussed about reshoring, but what is the importance of exports to our UK economy?
I'm going to contradict myself here because we're really talking about reshoring and bringing business back into the UK, but of course we want to manufacture in the UK and export both at the same time. We want a cake and eat it. It's significantly important. We touched earlier that it's a high percentage of the overall manufacturing value. About 35% is exported. This helps to contribute to the manufacturing sector in terms of its productivity, in terms of its ability to invest. The more business we have in the UK, the more cash we're spending. We also, by exporting and having close links to other countries, we can learn from them and we can make sure that we have a competitive advantage. But it also pushes up the value in the industry. And if we look at the wages again, the UK average wage in the manufacturing sector is 11% higher than the UK average wage. So the more we make for our own homegrown industries and the more we export, the bigger the industry, the more money we're making. And that's the message.
And the more money people have in their pockets, they put back into the economy, they spend, and everything is...
Absolutely.
Everything benefits. I mean, regionally, when we look at manufacturing, what does it look like on that scale? There are pockets where it's busier, stronger, more employees and stuff like that. How does that look?
Well, it's quite widely spread. London has a low manufacturing base, but if you look at other areas, in some areas manufacturing can account for more than 20% of overall employment, which is significant. But there's a good spread. There's a good spread across most regions.
And so we take regions and we put all those regions together, and we've obviously got a nation. And what's the importance and the impact of UK suppliers, and how much are we making in the UK?
Well, UK manufacturing companies spent 376 billion on the inputs of goods and services in 2022. Now, 63% of that was from UK suppliers, so 237 billion. So it's a massive amount of money spent. However, 37% of it wasn't. So there's 37% still imported into the UK.
Okay. And that sort of ties in with the OEMs that are making products and putting parts out to be made. So they're still putting parts overseas to be made and parts here. Why not just keep it all here? Surely, why wouldn't that be the case?
Well, I think there's been a trend over recent years to buy in rather than to make in-house from the OEMs. So between 2016, which was when this first report was commissioned, and 2022, which is when this report was commissioned, the number of direct jobs supported by the manufacturing sector decreased by 13,000, whilst the number of indirect jobs increased by 143,000. So if I read that correctly, that means there's a lot more goods being bought in from the supply chain. Now the question is, where is that supply chain, and is that change of strategy encouraging more in-sourced product from overseas? What can the government do to make sure that this business goes to the UK?
Yeah.
What can the OEMs do to ensure that they give significantly valuable long-term contracts to enable the UK to invest? Because, and you asked me a question earlier about why would somebody buying something from abroad? Firstly, price. Could be political reasons, there could be an offset, there could be other reasons, but there's no reason for a high value complex component today any other country to be more competitive than the UK.
I guess when you see that shrinking of the OEM manufacturing, it's which bits are leaking overseas, if we call it that, and what is staying here. The difference between your indirect and your direct. You talk about price and things like that of importing parts, but surely with the advent of new technologies and automation and things like that, the cost of making a part shouldn't be much different here to what it is somewhere else, should it? Especially when you take into consideration the logistics factors as well.
Well, I don't believe so. I believe the UK can and should be competitive on the manufacture of most, let's say, metallic or composite components today, whether they be for the aerospace industry, the transport industry, the energy industries. But in some cases we just don't have the right relevant plant and equipment in the UK today, and in order to make us competitive we need to invest.
And you talked about offsetting. This is something that some other countries do, but we don't do it, do we?
We don't do it as well, I don't think.
Yeah.
So there'll be reciprocal trade agreements to other countries where they will win business because they buy some kind of product from us, as we do as well. So again, we can't have a cake and eat it, but we don't make enough here, is my view.
So take all the money made in manufacturing. How much of this is then kind of distributed to the wider economy?
Well, this is really interesting, isn't it? The value of wages payable to workers in manufacturing was 103 billion when this report was written, and the supply chain is 86 billion, and this is using a model that these guys have been working with. So you're looking at kind of 200 billion of wages that are then re-spent into the economy. So it goes back to this whole circular idea again. The more we win in manufacturing, the more jobs we create, the more wages, the more money is then spent in the economy, and your 516 billion figure goes exponentially higher. And that's the value of what we create in the UK economy.
So if we talk about our sector, the engineering sector, how is that defined?
Okay, well, we are a subsector of manufacturing. So within the engineering sector, we're looking at fabricated metal products, computer electronic products, electrical equipment, machinery and equipment, motor vehicles, trailers, etc., other transport equipment. So there's a number of subsectors in there, but we are part of that whole manufacturing figure that you talked about earlier, the 518 billion.
Yeah, and then when we talk about regions again, the different sectors, I guess they're stronger in different areas as well?
They are. There's a little bit more pull to certain areas within our own sector sitting within manufacturing. West Midlands, for example, is a very strong sector with both gross value added and also employment numbers. They're up at kind of almost 6%. But the rest of them sit between 3.5% and 4%. With the exception of London obviously being a little bit lower. So again, there's a good spread of manufacturing companies across most regions of the UK.
And I mean, how many engineering companies in total, statistically, that would make up all of this, these numbers when it comes to the output?
2022, there were 31,320 firms operating within the engineering sector in the UK. And of these, 27% were small, so 10 to 49 employees, 8% were medium, 10 to 249 employees, 1% were your large companies, 250 and over. And
what about like the wages in our sector that we talk about? Because they're quite high, aren't they, compared to others?
Well, they are. So particularly within engineering, the median wage was 6,800 higher than in the economy as a whole. So again, the more value we put into our engineering sector, proportionally we're spending more money elsewhere.
Research and development?
Research and development, again, we're punching way above our weight here. 47% of all R&D expenditure in the UK businesses came from engineering, and the engineering subsector is even more R&D intensive than the manufacturing as a whole. So
that paves the way to a good future, doesn't it?
Of course it does. You know, we're the innovators, aren't we? Our industry is the UK has always been the pioneers of innovation, and we need to continue with that. We actually spent in 2022 11.1 billion on R&D, which accounted to 22% of all R&D expenditure within manufacturing.
It's big numbers.
Big numbers.
I mean, and a lot of these numbers we're talking about, they're really, really impressive. Just imagine how, expanded upon how big this manufacturing economy could be and how important it is. I mean, we mentioned this number again, 518 billion. I mean, what is the impact, in your opinion, or from the report, of engineering as a subsector?
Well, I think this is really important, and this is what the government needs to home in on. The impact to our sector, direct manufacturers was 66 billion, as we said earlier, which was 3% of the economy. If we roll that out to the supply chain, then that number goes to 129 billion, or 5.9%. But if we then cover the induced, all the added spend, if you like, directly from the engineering sector, we're up at 194 billion, which is 8.8% of the UK economy, which is a sector that's boxing above its weight in R&D, boxing above its weight in capital spend and capital investment. It's boxing above its weight in salaries. So the more proportional growth we get from engineering, the more money we're pumping back into the economy. Yeah,
I mean, this is a fantastic report. Again, you can download this from the MTA website. There's a lot of content in there. In fact, it's about 50 pages, isn't it, Lee? There's a lot there. Anyway, we've just tried to...
It's 51 pages.
51 pages. We've just tried to cover most of it, of course, in this podcast. I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, we mentioned names on this podcast. I know Andrea Wilson, Chris Greenlow, Stuart Whitehead, all big advocates of what we're talking about here on social media. Big names that want the same as what we do, as I'm sure there's many others too. Where do we go from here? What do we need?
Well, I think we all support each other. You've mentioned some big names there. You've also got the UK trade associations and the MTA. We're all lobbying for a government minister. We're all lobbying for more recognition. We need more support. We need more incentives. We need to make sure we protect the industry, and we incentivise the industry and subsidise the industry.
I couldn't agree more, and I think every time we do this, which is a little bit different to a lot of the videos that we make together on product, it opens my eyes to what the future could hold for us as a manufacturing nation. October, the end of October coming around, there's going to be the government are going to be making some decisions on costs and cutting costs, and where increasing taxes maybe, or they've said there's going to be no increase in income tax. So do you think that's going to affect business? What do we hope from this?
We hope not, don't we? Because we've just shown that we've already dropped from 8th to 12th in rankings as a manufacturing nation, and we've just emphasised the value added that we create from our subsector within manufacturing and from manufacturing as a whole. So if I was somebody in the government, I'd be looking at this and thinking, how do we grow this sector and build on the value added that
like
this
so many
sector
other nations do and succeed with
and are doing. So
they're
not getting it wrong, are they?
Well, no, because they're going up the league tables and we're dropping down. As part of this as well, something that I'm going to be doing is hosting a panel discussion, and I'm going to be inviting some of the names I've mentioned and others if you want to contribute, because I think that this is a time where we need to use our voices collectively to get to the right people in order to hopefully make some change and have a minister for manufacturing. I mean, why wouldn't we? There's a minister for everything else. I mean, something that represents 23% of our GDP. So it's been really interesting today, Lee. I know we've gone through this report, slightly different to how we normally do podcasts and videos, but hopefully the audience will have found value in some of the things we've spoken about and encouraged by some of the statistics, and also give them or give people more energy and enthusiasm to participate in this campaign. So thanks for continually bringing this to our attention, Lee, and look forward to doing this again with you and others soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the MTD CNC podcast, sponsored by Langley Alloys, specialists in a wide range of exotic materials for any application for all your engineering needs.